The shuttle bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and 3 humans stepped onto the polished metal floor of Kepler Station. The space around them was huge, bigger than any building they had ever seen on Earth. Strange lights floated in the air without any wires or supports. The walls seemed to glow with a soft blue light that came from nowhere. Jake Morrison looked around slowly. He was 25 years old, tall and thin, with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. He carried a simple black bag over his shoulder and wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's Naval Academy. Everything about the station felt wrong to him. Too clean, too quiet, too perfect. Behind him, Lisa Park stepped forward with quick, sharp movements. She was shorter than Jake, with black hair pulled back tight and dark eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her hands stayed close to her sides, ready to move fast if needed. She had spent 3 years fighting in the colonies, and she never forgot to watch for danger. Carlos Martinez came last, walking with the steady pace of someone who had been in many battles. He was older than the others, 32, with gray already showing in his black hair. Scars on his hands told stories of fights he had won. His brown eyes were tired but alert. He had volunteered for this mission because someone had to keep the younger ones alive. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," said a voice that sounded like metal scraping against stone. The humans turned to see a creature that looked like a giant insect walking on 2 legs. It was 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and a head that moved like a snake. Its skin was dark green and shiny like armor. "I am Commander Zethkri. You are the first humans to attend our academy." Jake stepped forward and gave a small bow. "Thank you for having us, Commander. We're honored to be here." The commander's head tilted to one side. "Honored, yes. We shall see if that feeling lasts." He turned and started walking. "Follow me. You will meet your fellow cadets." They walked through corridors that curved and twisted in ways that hurt to look at. The walls showed moving pictures of space battles, but the fights looked more like dances than wars. Ships moved slowly around each other, firing beams of light that seemed to push rather than destroy. When ships were hit, they just stopped working and floated away. No explosions, no fire, no screaming. "Their wars look different from ours," Lisa whispered to Carlos. "Everything here looks different from ours." Carlos whispered back. They entered, a large room filled with the strangest collection of beings the humans had ever seen. In one corner stood a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. Light moved through its body in slow waves, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes. Near the center of the room, a huge bear-like creature covered in thick fur sat on a chair that groaned under its weight. Its eyes were small and black, but they seemed intelligent. By the far wall, a tank of water held something that might have been a dolphin, if dolphins could be 10 feet long and had arms. The creature floated in its tank, watching everything, with large dark eyes that seemed both wise and sad. "Cadets," Commander Zethkri announced. "These are the human representatives. They will be training with you for the next year." The crystal being approached first. When it moved, it made a soft ringing sound like someone tapping a wine glass. "I am Veltar of the Silicoid Collective. We have heard much about your species." The voice was beautiful, like music, but there was something cold in it. "We were told you were warriors, but you seem small." Lisa's eyes narrowed, but Jake put a hand on her arm before she could speak. "We're here to learn," he said simply. The bear creature stood up, and the humans realized just how big it really was. It was at least 9 feet tall and probably weighed as much as a small car. When it spoke, its voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "I am Gromax of the Ursinian clans. We test strength through combat. Would you like to test your boar? Strength against mine?" Carlos smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "Maybe later." The creature in the tank moved closer to the glass. Its voice came from speakers around the room, soft and flowing like water. "I am Ninth of the Cetacean Depths. We value wisdom over strength. Tell me, humans, what wisdom do you bring to our academy?" "We bring experience," Jake answered. "Experience in what?" asked Veltar. The crystal being's light pulsed faster now. "Showing interest, survival," Lisa said quietly. The alien cadets looked at each other. They had been studying war for years, but they had never actually fought in one. Their species had moved beyond such things long ago. Wars were settled by rules now. Formal challenges. Limited battles with agreed-upon outcomes. The idea of fighting, just to survive, seemed primitive to them. Commander Zethkri led the humans to a smaller room with 3 beds and simple furniture. "You will stay here," he said. "Training begins tomorrow at dawn. We will start with basic combat theory, then move to tactical simulations. Each species will present their military history and fighting methods to the others." After the commander left, the 3 humans sat in silence for a long time. "They think we're weak," Lisa said finally. "Good," Carlos replied. "Let them think that." Jake walked to the window and looked out at the stars. "Did you see their war footage in the hallway? Ships that stop working instead of exploding. Battles that end when someone gives up. They fight like it's a game." "It is a game to them," Carlos said. "They've forgotten what real war looks like." "Should we tell them?" Lisa asked. Jake and Carlos looked at each other. They both had the same thought. These aliens had no idea what humans were really like. They had no idea what Earth was like. They had no idea what it meant to come from a world where everything tried to kill you, where you had to fight for every meal, every breath, every day of life. "Next week," Jake said, "when it's our turn to present. Then we'll show them what human warfare really looks like." Outside their window, the alien cadets were talking among themselves. They pointed at the humans' room and laughed. The humans seemed so small and weak. How had such a species even survived long enough to reach the stars? They would find out soon enough. In the distance, stars twinkled peacefully in the black of space. None of them knew that some of those stars had planets where humans had learned to fight. Planets where the weak died, and only the strong survived. Planets where peace was not a gift, but something you had to take by force and keep by being ready to fight again. The Galactic Defense Academy was about to learn why humans had been invited to join them. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous students are the ones who look harmless. The first week at the academy passed like a strange dream for the humans. Every morning they woke to the sound of soft bells instead of harsh alarms. The food tasted like nothing they had ever eaten, but it filled their stomachs without making them feel heavy or tired. The beds were too soft, the rooms too quiet, the air too clean. Jake spent his mornings in tactical training with the other cadets. The aliens used computers that could think faster than any human brain. They could calculate the best attack plans, in seconds predict enemy movements with perfect accuracy, and solve complex battle problems without breaking a sweat. Jake struggled to keep up, his human mind working slowly compared to their advanced thinking. "You seem confused," Veltar said during one training session. The crystal being's body glowed brighter when he was pleased with himself. "Perhaps your species needs more time to understand advanced warfare." Jake nodded and smiled. "We're still learning your methods." Lisa trained in the combat simulators, fighting against holographic enemies that moved and fought like real soldiers. But the fights felt wrong to her. The enemies always fought fair. They took turns attacking. They never used dirty tricks or fought desperate. When they were beaten, they simply disappeared with a soft chime sound. "This is not how real enemies fight," she told Carlos after one session. "I know," Carlos replied, "but let's see how they fight first." The second week brought the alien presentations. Each species showed off their military history with pride, displaying their battles on huge screens that made the humans feel like they were really there. The Catherians went first. Commander Zethkri stood at the front of the room, his forearms moving as he explained their way of war. On the screen, Catherian ships moved through space like dancers, never wasting a single movement. Their weapons hit targets with perfect accuracy, disabling enemy ships without destroying them. "The Catherian method focuses on precision," the commander explained. "We study our enemies for months before we attack. We know exactly where to strike to end the battle quickly. In our last war, we defeated the Nexus Republic in just 3 days with only 47 casualties total." The alien cadets nodded with approval. Gromax, the bear-like Ursinian, made a low rumbling sound that meant he was impressed. Jake raised his hand. What happened to the enemy soldiers after you disabled their ships? They surrendered, of course, Commander Zethkri replied. Once they could not fight effectively, the war was over. They agreed to our terms and returned to their home worlds. And they stayed defeated? Lisa asked. The commander's head tilted in confusion. Why would they continue fighting? They had lost. The humans looked at each other but said nothing. Next came the silicoids. Veltar projected images of their crystal cities surrounded by walls of living stone. When enemies attacked, the walls grew higher and thicker until nothing could break through them. We prefer defensive warfare, Veltar explained, his voice ringing like bells. We make our positions so strong that enemies cannot hurt us. Eventually, they grow tired of trying and go away. In our greatest victory, we held off the Iron Fleet for 6 months. They used up all their supplies trying to break our defenses and finally gave up. 6 months, Carlos repeated quietly. And then what? Then they left, Veltar said, as if this was obvious. The war was over. Did they come back later? Jake asked. Why would they come back? They had failed. Again, the humans exchanged glances. The Ursinians presented next. Gromax stood proudly as images showed massive bear-like creatures in thick armor, carrying weapons bigger than most humans. Their battles looked impressive, with huge explosions and dramatic charges. The Ursinian way is to show overwhelming strength, Gromax rumbled. We make ourselves so fearsome that enemies run away rather than fight us. Our warriors are trained from birth to be perfect fighting machines. In our last conflict, the Spiral Confederacy took one look at our army and surrendered without firing a single shot. They surrendered just by looking at you? Lisa asked. Of course, they could see they had no chance of winning. What if they hadn't surrendered? Carlos wanted to know. Gromax looked confused. But they did surrender. Why would anyone fight a battle they could not win? The cetaceans went last. Nith floated in her water tank as images showed underwater cities and sleek ships that moved like fish through the depths of alien oceans. Their battles were beautiful, like underwater ballets where opposing forces moved around each other in complex patterns. We believe in wisdom over violence, Nith explained in her flowing voice. We study our enemies' minds and find ways to make them not want to fight. We show them that cooperation is better than conflict. Our greatest victory was convincing the Void Hunters to become our allies instead of our enemies. How long did that take? Jake asked. 7 years of careful negotiation. And during those 7 years, did they stop attacking other people? Nith's large eyes blinked slowly. Well, no. But eventually they saw the wisdom of our way. After all the presentations, the alien cadets gathered to discuss what they had learned. The humans sat quietly in one corner, listening. Each species has found the perfect way to fight, Veltar said, his crystal body glowing with satisfaction. Precision, defense, intimidation, and wisdom. These are the 4 pillars of civilized warfare. Wars should be quick and clean, Gromax agreed. No, unnecessary death or destruction. The goal is always to end conflict as fast as possible, Nith added. Violence should be the last choice, used only when nothing else works. Commander Zethkri nodded approvingly. This is why our galaxy has known peace for so long. We have moved beyond the primitive brutality of our ancestors. From their corner, Jake watched the alien cadets congratulate each other on their advanced and civilized methods of war. None of them seemed to notice that all their victories had something in common. In every case, their enemies had chosen to give up rather than fight to the end. None of them had ever faced an enemy that refused to quit. None of them had ever fought against someone who would rather die than surrender. None of them had ever been in a war where the only choices were victory or extinction. Next week, the humans will present their military history, Commander Zethkri announced. I am curious to see what methods such a young species has developed. Jake stood up slowly. We'll do our best to show you something interesting. As the alien cadets filed out of the room talking excitedly about their presentations, Carlos moved closer to Jake and Lisa. They have no idea, he said quietly. None at all. Lisa agreed. Jake looked at the empty screen where the alien battles had been displayed. Should we start with the recent wars or the old ones? Start recent, Carlos suggested. Work backwards. Let them get used to the idea slowly. And if they can't handle the recent wars, Lisa asked. Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then we'll know exactly what we're dealing with. Outside, the alien cadets were already planning their next training exercises. Confident in their superior methods of warfare, they had no idea that in 1 week, 3 humans would show them what war really looked like when fought by a species that had learned to survive on a world where everything wanted to kill them. The Academy's peaceful routine continued, but beneath the surface, something was about to change forever. The presentation room was packed. Word had spread through the Academy that the humans would finally show their military history. Alien cadets from all species filled the seats, curious to see what such a primitive species could teach them about warfare. Some had even brought recording devices to capture what they expected would be an amusing display of backward fighting methods. Commander Zethkri sat in the front row with the other instructors. Academy Director Quindara, a tall being with silver skin and no visible eyes, had come specially to watch. Even cadets who were supposed to be in other classes had found reasons to be there. Jake Morrison walked to the front of the room carrying a small device. His face was serious, more serious than the aliens had ever seen him. Behind him, Lisa Park and Carlos Martinez took seats near the projector controls. Before we start, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room, I want you to understand something. Human warfare developed differently than yours. We didn't have the benefit of galactic civilization to guide us. We learned to fight by fighting. We learned to survive by surviving. He activated the holographic display. The first image showed a red, dusty landscape under a pale sky. Strange buildings dotted the horizon, and the ground was marked with deep craters. This is Mars, one of our colony worlds. 3 years ago, raiders attacked our mining settlements there. They killed families, took supplies, and threatened to come back for more. The image changed to show human soldiers in gray armor moving across the rocky ground. The aliens watched with mild interest. The humans looked small compared to Ursinian warriors, less precise than Catherian forces. Then the shooting started. The holographic display erupted with the sound of gunfire, explosions, and shouting voices. The human soldiers moved fast, diving behind rocks and buildings as enemy fire tore through the air around them. Some soldiers fell and didn't get back up. Others kept fighting even when they were wounded. The Battle of Ridgeline Station, Jake continued, his voice steady over the noise. It lasted 4 days. We had 300 soldiers against their 800. Veltar's crystal form flickered with confusion. Why didn't you withdraw when you realized you were outnumbered? Because there were civilians behind us, Lisa Park answered from her seat. We withdraw, they die. The battle footage continued. The aliens watched human soldiers charge directly into enemy fire, saw explosions that tore bodies apart, witnessed medics running into danger to help wounded comrades. This wasn't the clean, precise warfare they knew. This was chaos and blood and desperation. Casualty report, Jake said as numbers appeared on the screen. We lost 97 soldiers. The enemy lost 412. 400 dead, Gromax rumbled, his massive form shifting uncomfortably. For one small settlement? For the principal, Carlos said quietly. You don't attack human civilians and expect to walk away. The presentation moved to the next battle. The siege of Europa Station, where human defenders held a space platform for 3 months against constant attacks. The aliens watched footage of humans fighting in corridors filled with smoke and fire, using makeshift weapons when their regular guns ran out of ammunition. Why didn't they surrender? Nith asked, her voice bubbling with distress. Their position was hopeless. Surrender wasn't an option, Jake replied. The enemy had already shown what they did to prisoners. The images showed human soldiers jury-rigging, explosives, fighting hand-to-hand when ammunition ran low, and continuing to resist even when parts of their station were destroyed around them. Some fought while wounded so badly they could barely stand. 93 days, Jake continued. No resupply, no reinforcements, no hope of rescue. They held until a relief force arrived. How many survived? Commander Zethkri asked, his mandibles clicking nervously. 47 out of 300. A shocked silence filled the room. In all the alien presentations, casualty rates had been measured in single digits or percentages, so small they barely registered. The humans were talking about battles where most of the fighters died. The presentation continued with more recent conflicts. The relief of Titan, where a single human battalion marched through a radioactive wasteland to rescue trapped colonists. The Iron Mountain campaign, where human forces tunneled through solid rock for weeks to attack an enemy base from below. Each battle showed the same pattern. Humans facing impossible odds, humans taking terrible losses, humans refusing to give up no matter how hopeless things looked. "This is madness," whispered Quindara, the academy director. "Your soldiers fight like they want to die." "Our soldiers fight like they have something worth dying for," Carlos corrected. "But the casualties," Veltar said, his crystal body now completely dim with shock. "You lose more soldiers in one battle than we lose in entire wars. That's because you fight enemies who quit when things get hard," Lisa said, standing up. "We fight enemies who want to kill us all." Jake advanced to the next section of his presentation. "These were our recent conflicts, small wars on frontier worlds. Now let me show you what we call a real war." The holographic display changed to show an image that made several alien cadets gasp. It was Earth, but not the blue and green world they had expected. This Earth was gray and brown, with massive clouds of smoke covering entire continents. Cities burned in the distance, and strange flying machines filled the sky. "World War II, Jake announced. "It lasted 6 years. It involved most of our planets, nations. Before it ended, 70 million humans were dead. The number hung in the air like a physical thing. 70 million. Some of the smaller alien species didn't have that many individuals in their entire civilization. 70 million, Gromax repeated slowly. In 6 years. And that was just one of many such wars," Carlos added. "We've been fighting wars like this for thousands of years." The footage began to play, and the aliens saw something that would haunt their dreams for weeks to come. Massive armies of humans marching across continents. Battles involving millions of soldiers. Cities reduced to rubble. Weapons that could destroy entire areas in seconds. They watched human soldiers storm beaches under heavy fire, knowing most of them would die. They saw humans fight building by building through destroyed cities, room by room, floor by floor. They witnessed battles in frozen forests, burning deserts, and mountain ranges where the dead froze solid before they could be buried. "How?" Ninth whispered, her large eyes wide with horror. "How did your species survive this?" "By being harder to kill than our enemies," Jake answered simply. 3 more alien cadets left the room. Several others requested permission to contact their homeworlds. Veltar's crystal form had become so dim, he was almost invisible. But Jake wasn't finished. "This is recent history for us. Modern warfare. Would you like to see how we fought before we had advanced weapons?" The silence in the room was complete. Even the instructors sat frozen in their seats. "I think," Commander Zethkri said carefully, "we have seen enough for today." Jake looked around the room at the shocked faces of the alien cadets. Some were pale. Others were shaking. A few looked like they might be sick. "We have 6 more hours of material prepared," he said quietly. "But we can stop here if you prefer." Nobody asked to see more. As the aliens filed out of the room in stunned silence, Jake packed up his presentation device. Lisa and Carlos joined him at the front of the room. "Think they get the message?" Lisa asked. "Some of them," Carlos replied. "The smart ones." Jake looked at the empty seats where dozens of alien cadets had been sitting just minutes before. They wanted to know what kind of species they were dealing with. Now they know. Outside in the corridors, the alien cadets walked in small groups, speaking in hushed voices about what they had seen. For the first time since the academy opened, nobody was talking about the superiority of civilized warfare. They had just learned that somewhere in the galaxy was a species that didn't fight wars to win territory or resources, or even honor. Humans fought wars to survive, and they had been doing it for so long that they had become very, very good at it. The humans, they realized, weren't the students at this academy. They were the teachers, and the lesson they had just taught was simple. There are things in the universe worth fighting for, and if you're not prepared to fight harder than your enemy, you're going to lose everything. The next morning, only half the alien cadets showed up for training. The others had requested medical leave, claiming stress and nightmares. Those who did come looked tired and nervous. They jumped at sudden sounds and avoided looking directly at the humans. Commander Zethkri called an emergency meeting with the academy instructors. Through the thin walls, the humans could hear raised voices and clicking mandibles. Words like dangerous and unstable and maybe we made a mistake drifted through the corridors. Jake found Veltar sitting alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The crystal being's body was so dim, it was hard to see him against the dark space beyond the windows. "Are you all right?" Jake asked, sitting down nearby. Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. "I have been thinking about your presentation, about the numbers. 70 million dead in 6 years. It was a bad time for our species," Jake said quietly. "But you survived it. Your species grew stronger." Veltar turned his crystalline head toward Jake. "How do you live with such knowledge? How do you sleep knowing what your people are capable of?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "The same way you live knowing that crystal beings can create walls strong enough to stop any weapon. The same way Gromax lives knowing he's strong enough to tear apart most enemies with his bare hands. We are what we needed to become to survive." "But the cost," Veltar whispered. "The terrible cost." "Yes," Jake agreed. "The cost is always terrible. That's why we try to avoid war when we can. But when we can't avoid it, we make sure we win." That afternoon, the Academy's emergency session continued. Through the communication network, representatives from 12 different species were demanding answers. Why had humans been admitted to the Academy? Were they a threat to galactic peace? Should they be sent home immediately? Lisa found Gromax in the training center, sitting on the floor and staring at his massive hands. The Ursinian was so big that even sitting down, he was taller than Lisa standing up. "You are afraid of us now," Lisa said. It wasn't a question. Gromax's small black eyes looked at her. "I thought I knew what strength meant. I thought being big and strong made me a warrior." "You are a warrior," Lisa told him. "You've been trained since birth to fight." "But I have never really fought," Gromax admitted. "I have practiced. I have trained. I have scared enemies into running away. But I have never stood on a battlefield where my friends were dying around me and kept fighting anyway." Lisa sat down next to the giant being. "That's not your fault. Your people found better ways to solve problems, smarter ways. But what happens when smart ways don't work?" Gromax asked. "What happens when the enemy refuses to be scared? What happens when they keep coming no matter how strong you are?" Lisa looked at her hands. They were small and scarred, marked by years of holding weapons and fighting battles. "Then you find out what you're really made of." The Academy's crisis deepened when long-range sensors detected something that made everyone forget about the human problem, at least temporarily. A fleet of unknown ships was approaching the station. The ships were large, heavily armed, and they weren't responding to any communication attempts. Academy Director Quindara called an emergency assembly. All cadets and instructors gathered in the main hall, their faces showing worry and confusion. The silver-skinned director stood at the yaw front, his voice tight with concern. "We have a situation," he announced. 12 hours ago, our sensors detected an approaching fleet. The ships are of unknown design and have not responded to our hails. They will reach our position in 72 hours. Images appeared on the main screen showing dark, angular ships that looked nothing like the sleek vessels of galactic civilization. These ships were built for war, covered in weapon mounts and armor plating. They moved through space like hungry predators. "We have sent messages in every known language," Quindara continued. We have broadcast mathematical sequences, musical patterns, and visual symbols. There has been no response. We must assume their intentions are hostile. A murmur of fear went through the assembled aliens. In 200 years, the Academy had never faced a real threat. It was a place of learning, protected by treaties and the reputation of galactic civilization. Commander Zethkri stepped forward. All combat-ready instructors will prepare defensive positions. We will follow standard protocols for dealing with hostile contacts. What are the standard protocols? Jake asked, standing up. The commander's mandibles clicked nervously. We will attempt to negotiate. If that fails, we will demonstrate our superior technology to convince them to withdraw. If that fails, we will use minimal force to disable their ships. And if they don't care about your superior technology? Carlos asked. If they keep coming anyway? The silence in the room was deafening. Nobody had an answer, because nobody had ever faced that situation before. Nith's voice came from her water tank, bubbling with anxiety. Perhaps they are just lost. Perhaps they need help and don't know how to ask for it. Lisa stood up slowly. Those aren't lost ships. Those are warships, built for one purpose. How can you be certain? Feltar asked, his crystal form flickering with nervous light. Because we've built ships like that, Jake answered. We know what they look like. The Academy director looked at the three humans with something that might have been hope or desperation. What would your people do in this situation? Jake, Lisa, and Carlos looked at each other. They all had the same thought. What would humans do? Humans would prepare for the worst possible outcome. Humans would assume the enemy was coming to kill everyone and plan accordingly. We would get ready to fight, Carlos said simply. But surely, there are other options, Quindara protested. Negotiation, withdrawal, calling for help from the Galactic Fleet. The Galactic Fleet is 6 days away, Jake pointed out, and withdrawal means abandoning the Academy and everyone in it. As for negotiation, Lisa added, looking at the dark ships on the screen, you can't negotiate with someone who won't talk. To you. Commander Zethkri's forearms moved restlessly. But this is an academy, a place of learning. Surely they wouldn't attack a non-military target. Surely, Carlos agreed, his voice flat with sarcasm. The alien cadets looked around at each other with growing panic. Everything they had learned about civilized warfare assumed that enemies would follow the rules. But these ships didn't look like they cared about rules. What do we do? Gromax asked, his voice small despite his massive size. Jake looked around, the room at the frightened faces of the alien cadets and instructors. Yesterday they had been horrified by human military history. Today they were about to learn why that history existed. We do what humans have always done, Jake said quietly. We survive. He turned to Commander Zethkri. With your permission, sir, we'd like to help plan the defense. The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly as he thought. Around the room, alien cadets who had been avoiding the humans all day suddenly looked at them with new eyes, not with fear this time, but with something that might have been hope. What do you need? Commander Zethkri asked. Everything, Lisa answered. Ship layouts, weapons inventory, personnel files, sensor data, and we need to assume the worst. Which is? Quindara asked. Carlos smiled, but there was no humor in it. That they're coming here to kill everyone, and they won't stop until they succeed or until we make them stop. The room fell silent again. But this time the silence wasn't filled with shock or fear. It was filled with the grim understanding that their peaceful world was about to end, and their only hope lay with the three humans they had been afraid of just hours before. Outside the station, the unknown fleet continued its approach. Dark ships moving through space toward an academy full of students who were about to learn the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, survival isn't about being civilized. Sometimes, it's about being willing to fight harder than the other side. The academy's main command center buzzed with nervous activity. Alien instructors moved between computer stations, their faces showing worry and confusion. None of them had ever planned a real defense before. Their war games always ended with negotiations or tactical withdrawals. Jake stood at the central table, studying holographic displays of the approaching fleet. The enemy ships moved in perfect formation, dark and silent as death itself. Behind him, Lisa worked with the station's weapons officer, a nervous Catherian whose mandibles clicked constantly with stress. 12 ships, Jake announced to the room. Heavy cruiser class built for assault operations, no communication arrays visible, minimal life support signatures. These ships are designed for one thing. What's that? Commander Zethkri asked, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer. Killing everything they find, Carlos replied from across the room where he was studying personnel files. No negotiation equipment, no diplomatic features, no systems for taking prisoners. They come, they destroy, they leave. Academy Director Quindara moved between the stations like a lost child. But why? Why would anyone attack an academy? We have no military value, no strategic importance. You have something they want, Lisa said, not looking up from the weapons console. Information, technology, or maybe they just want to send a message to the rest of the galaxy. What message? Veltar asked. The crystal being stood in the corner, his body so dim with fear he was barely visible. That nowhere is safe, Jake answered quietly. The next 6 hours changed everything at the academy. The humans worked with mechanical efficiency, turning the peaceful learning center into something that might survive an attack. They sealed unnecessary sections, moved civilians to protected areas, and armed every cadet who could hold a weapon. But, more importantly, they began teaching the aliens how to think like humans. Forget everything you learned about civilized warfare, Carlos told a group of mixed-species cadets. These enemies don't care about your rules. They won't surrender when you demonstrate superior technology. They won't retreat when they start losing. They will keep coming until they win, or until they're all dead. Gromax raised one massive paw. How do we fight enemies like that? The same way, Lisa answered. You fight until you win or until you're dead. No middle ground. The alien. Cadets looked at each other with growing understanding. This was what humans meant by survival. Not just staying alive when things were easy, but keeping going when everything seemed hopeless. Nith floated in her portable tank, brought to the command center so she could help with communications. I still believe we should try to talk to them, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. We will, Jake promised, right up until they start shooting, but we plan for what happens after that. With 18 hours until the enemy arrived, the first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Veltar approached Jake during a brief rest period, his crystal form glowing with new determination. I want to learn, the silicoid said simply. Teach me to fight like a human. Jake looked at the crystal being for a long moment. It's not about fighting techniques. It's about thinking differently. Can you do that? I can try. Jake led Veltar to a quiet corner and activated a training hologram. Scenario. You're defending a position with 5 soldiers against 50 attackers. Standard galactic doctrine says retreat and call for reinforcements. What do you do? Veltar's crystalline form flickered as he thought. Retreat to a better position and attempt to negotiate while help arrives. Wrong. The humans you're protecting can't be moved. Reinforcements are 6 hours away. The enemy will kill everyone if you retreat. Jake reset the simulation. Try again. This time, Veltar studied the scenario differently. Instead of looking for ways to avoid fighting, he looked for ways to win despite the odds. Use the terrain to force them into a narrow approach. Create defensive positions that multiply our firepower. Make them pay for every step forward. Better. But you're still thinking like they'll retreat when casualties get high. What if they don't? Veltar's glow intensified as understanding dawned. Then we hold the line no matter what. We make the cost so high that even if they win, they'll be too damaged to threaten anyone else. Now you're thinking like a human. Word of Veltar's lesson spread quickly through the academy. One by one, alien cadets approached the humans asking to learn. Gromax wanted to understand how humans fought when strength wasn't enough. Nith asked how to make hard decisions when all choices led to suffering. But the real change came when Commander Zethkri called Jake to the command center with 12 hours until contact. "I've been reviewing your species' military files," the commander said, his forearms moving restlessly. "Your tactical doctrine, your strategic thinking, your approach to warfare. It's all based on one assumption." "Which is?" Jake asked. "That the enemy is trying to destroy you completely. That there is no option except total victory or total defeat." Zethkri's mandibles clicked slowly. "We've never faced enemies like that. Our wars have always been limited conflicts with negotiated outcomes. Now you understand why we fight the way we do," Jake replied. "When survival is the only option, you learn to do whatever it takes to survive." The final hours passed quickly. The alien cadets worked alongside the humans, learning to think in terms of desperate defense rather than civilized combat. They practiced scenarios where retreat wasn't possible, where negotiation had failed, where only determination and skill stood between them and destruction. When the enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, every screen in the academy showed the same image: 12 dark ships moving toward them with the inexorable certainty of death itself. "All stations, this is Academy Control," Quindara announced over the communication system. "Unknown vessels, this is Kepler Station Academy. You are approaching a civilian educational facility. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." Silence filled the void between the stations and the approaching ships. "Unknown vessels, please respond. We wish to communicate with you." More silence. Jake stood at the command station, watching the enemy ships grow larger on the screen. Around him, alien cadets who had been terrified of human warfare just days before now waited for his orders. "Range?" he asked. 15 minutes to weapons range," the Catherian weapons officer reported. "All sections report ready," Carlos announced. From the communication station, Lisa looked up from the tactical display. "Defensive positions are manned. All cadets are in protected areas. We're as ready as we're going to be." Commander Zethkri moved to stand beside Jake. "I've sent emergency signals to the Galactic fleet, but they won't arrive for days. Whatever happens here, we face it alone." Jake nodded. "Then we face it like humans. We hold the line. We protect what matters. And we make them pay for every inch." Around the command center, alien cadets who had spent their lives studying the theory of warfare prepared to learn its terrible reality. They had watched human war footage and been horrified by the violence and casualties. Now they understood why humans fought that way. When everything you cared about was threatened, when there was nowhere to run and no hope of mercy, you fought with everything you had. You fought like your life depended on it because it did. The enemy ships continued their approach, silent and deadly in the darkness of space. But they were no longer approaching a peaceful academy full of students who believed in civilized warfare. They were approaching a fortress defended by beings who had learned the hardest lesson humans had to teach: that sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is be completely uncivilized to those who threaten the innocent. "Contact in 10 minutes, the weapons officer announced. Jake looked around the command center at alien faces filled with determination instead of fear. "Remember what we practiced. Trust your training, trust each other, and no matter what happens, don't give up." The academy had become something new in those final hours. No longer just a place of learning, but a symbol of what happened when beings who valued peace were forced to fight for it. The humans had come to the academy as students, but they had become teachers of the most important lesson in the galaxy: that survival sometimes requires you to be willing to do terrible things to protect what you love. Outside, 12 enemy ships closed the distance to an academy that would not surrender, defended by cadets who had learned to fight like humans.